My name is Pham, and in English, it's Julie Pham. And I have my own company called Curiosity Base, which fosters curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that is where we spend most of our waking hours.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over the world.
What does it mean to be Vietnamese to you these days?
Hustler. One of the things I really love about our Vietnamese community is I just feel we're very entrepreneurial and problem solvers and resourceful and resilient. And so I think of hustlers.
I agree with you. I think that we in Vietnam today, you could see it all over. You know, we hear about us here in the US being a country of small business people. The engine of our economy is small business. But when you go to Vietnam, you see that even more so everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, all the street vendors, all the little shops where you're selling the same thing as the person next to you, and it's just that difference of the relationships. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, when I think about people who start newspapers, I think of people who are academic, who are brilliant, people who in Vietnam come from that world, and then they come here to the United States. Is that what happened in your family?
Well, my father was in the South Vietnamese Navy as a journalist, so he was in the press corps. So he did have a bit of that training in that, because of the aptitude when he was in Vietnam. When my parents came here, we came as boat people. I was a 2-month-old baby. This was 1979. My parents worked all these odd jobs. My mom got really busy with I have 2 younger brothers who were born in Tacoma, Washington. And after being here for several years, they were seeing the growth of the Vietnamese community. And also my dad was just tired of working for someone else. And he said that he really felt that he had to kind of do heads down. He eventually became an engineer, and he felt that there was a lot of resentment against refugees. And at the same time, the Vietnamese community was growing here in Seattle. And one of his best friends, Pham, who's in Orange County, who's part of creating Nguoi Viet daily. And so it was just like, hey, what if we create a newspaper to serve our growing Vietnamese community? And so
What year was that?
My parents, 1986.
Okay.
And actually what happened then, I guess, was Nguoi Viet had actually wanted to expand. They were doing really well. And so they put in some startup money, some loans to different cities. And Seattle is actually the only one that survived. So we're Nguoi Viet Tây Bắc, so Vietnamese people of the Pacific Northwest.
Do you know how many Vietnamese are living in that area, or
living in Washington, or living
yes,
in
for your circulation? Like, how many people live in that area?
So there
Vietnamese people.
So last census count, there are about 70,000 in Washington. I mean, some estimates would be 100,000. So, and in the immediate Seattle area, I'm not quite sure. I can't remember. But I will say this: it is the 3rd largest Asian community in Washington, and for quite a while, there was more Vietnamese spoken than Spanish in Seattle proper. And we know this because in the 2010 census, you have to determine which voting material gets translated, and it's a threshold by language. So that was the case in 2010. And the Vietnamese community is pretty big in Seattle.
I wonder, when your father and mother started out, did they have a sort of a number crunching formula to figure out if something like a newspaper is a viable thing?
I don't think it was that sophisticated, Kenneth. I think it was, hey, there are lots of Vietnamese here. And also there was just before that, there had been a state-sponsored Vietnamese newspaper. And when I say state-sponsored, it was sponsored by Washington State, and they closed down. And so I think they closed down maybe 1 or 2 years before my parents started in Viet. And so it was like, well, there's a need, and they could see this growth of the newspaper industry down in Southern California. So it's like, let's just try this, and they had the support of Viet too.
So you grew up in the business. I've always wanted to know what the infrastructure for these organizations were, because we're going to lose this story. We're going to lose this sort of background of how these things actually function. We hear about the newspaper industry folding and hard print going away, but maybe you and I can talk about that. And because you were on the inside growing up, I think you were like a child when this was going on, and you grew up in it. And looking back, probably the infrastructure. And so I have a lot of questions that, just for my own, obviously I do this for my own satisfaction, I want to know how these things work, because the online digital formats of news has shifted, and we're quickly losing the way these things were done. So go ahead.
So just relationships. I mean, the advertisers are a lot of people who my parents met, and then also all the word of mouth. And I remember growing up where it was these you do typesetting by printing out paper, and then there would be these big laminate sheets, and we would have to print out, use X-Acto knife, roll it on with wax. Then they would you take it to the printers and you'd photograph it. And then you would, there were these big printers that would print the other local newspapers. And I remember in 2007, I worked at the newspaper to help with the transition. That was actually my first time. It was for 6 months where I worked there full time. And it was in the middle of my PhD program. And up to that point, my parents were still using that typeset system, even though at that point, a lot of newspapers had transitioned to PDF, sending PDFs and printing from there. And so I want you to imagine, on Thursday night, we'd have these big laminate sheets, and you'd have to put it in a black suitcase, this big black portfolio suitcase. And then it would be my brother, who had been working at the newspaper since college. He would drive it up to the printer. And then Friday morning, the delivery people would go to the printers and they would pick up the newspapers, and someone was always responsible for that big black suitcase to pick that up. And I remember when I was project managing the transition from doing this one way of layout to doing it by sending PDFs just on the computer. We didn't have to drive. And that morning, it was like, where's the black suitcase? Where's the black suitcase? And we realized we didn't typeset that way. We didn't do it that way. And it was just wow, here's the change.
What year was that?
That was 2007. So that was actually, and so you think about those first movers and how they set up this infrastructure, and yet they can be the ones, the last to transition. And that was the case because there were other Vietnamese newspapers that sprouted up and that were much more sophisticated in terms of the way that they would lay out the newspaper. They just came later, and so it was easier for them to make that transition. And for my family, it was just like, oh, it's so hard for change. So that's one example.
No, when you say type set, because I think about, I think it's the word is the Gutenberg, or the old presses of when it first started out. They were literally putting the alphabets in, right?
I might be using the wrong term, but basically it'd be imagine printing it out on just a laser printer, and then rolling it on with wax onto this big laminate sheet. And then when you take it to the printers, they photograph it and they create these films.
Got it.
And then from the films,
they make plates. Yeah, I went to high school for printing. So I had to run 4-color presses and, work out the ink, and there's all of these different formulas. I remember nothing about it, but it always fascinated me. How many people were part of the operation from A to Z?
So there were, my parents, and then 2 of my dad's friends from re-education camp came in the mid 80s, and no, actually, I think it was the early 90s. And so one became the news editor and the other one became the graphics editor. And they were the longest employees in Nguyen Văn Hoa still works there. He's still the news editor.
What a name.
And so and then there are people who are just like in and out. My dad took actually a lot of pride in employing people and kind of just providing this temporary employment while they were going through school, or then they were starting their businesses. So it'd often be like, oh, the person who owns Van Produce who used to deliver newspapers, or like all these Boeing engineers, they used to work here. And so it was fine that it was kind of like temporary. And then there was the core team. And so my mom in the beginning years would take care of the business side. And now for the past 12 years, we have a really great employee, Dong Phương Lê, who's been instrumental to helping with the newspaper. So in terms of the core non-family, there are just 2 to 3 people. And then there's the family members, and my brother, Andy, still helps out, has been working there since he was in college. I always tease him that he learned his Vietnamese through selling rau vặt, through selling classified ads. And because they just put him in the front desk and said, you're selling, and that's how he learned his Vietnamese. Wow. And my youngest brother, Don, for a while was working as a photographer, and I worked there for 3 years.
What an amazing business. But as I say that, I understand that just because we think it's an amazing childhood, that's not often the case with kids that grow up in these businesses, right?
It was really hard. I mean, there was a lot of pride because people knew my parents. You're just like, oh, because sometimes the Seattle Times would write articles. But it was really hard. I mean, I like rarely saw my parents. So growing up, I actually didn't speak Vietnamese. So I spoke Vietnamese until I was 5 and entered school. And then, and I was a total latchkey kid though, because my parents were always at the newspaper. And so we were often at the newspaper when we were in elementary school. We'd sell those school fundraisers. I remember selling chocolate bunnies and out from the front desk of that. And then there were just lots of events that my parents needed to go to. And so I think in high school, I appreciated more. I was in the school newspaper myself. And then, yes, later on, I appreciated it. And I will say though, when I came back to Seattle in 2008, and that's when I started working full-time for the newspaper, it was really hard. I mean, it was the worldwide recession. It was the decline of print newspapers. Seattle used to have 2 dailies. It went down to 1 daily. And it was really hard. And I also learned how to there's a Vietnamese way of doing business, which is much more flexible. And I'd come in with all of these, what do you mean? You have to bill people and they pay you? Well, not yet. It's like, but this bill is outstanding for like over a year. And so I actually instituted a barter system. I was very much like, these bills need to get paid. And if I get gift certificates for spa services, that's okay. Like, what can we do? And I would even sometimes do like 3-way, like, oh, you need this service, I need this service, I will barter their services for this service I need, just to get bills paid and to get services. So I think when I talked about resourcefulness, scrappiness, there's a lot of that I learned from the newspaper.
It's so crazy, these visuals that I have them. When I saw you online, your online persona, you look like an academic, somebody who's spent their entire life and studied things. To hear that story that you just told about the 3-way bartering, that is some like far out shit.
Yes, it was someone. I wanted an accountant to help me, and he needed print services. He wasn't even Vietnamese, actually. He needed printing. He was starting a new business. And so I traded advertising for printing, which then that printing was for the accountant who would then give me services. So
it just goes to show, when we look at people, we have these like judgments, and we think that based on what we read, we think we know. And I think doing this work for me always allows me to expand my brain a little bit more about like what you think of people when we sit down and we start hearing these things about human beings and how much hustle somebody might have, even though they're like academically heavy, right? I mean,
Oh no,
you're
there was like, I mean, I came back to Seattle after I finished my PhD. I came back to Seattle to get my real life MBA. And, and that was because it was like, well, and I'd actually for a while thought, should I go back and get an MBA? My dad was like, you're too old. And that was true. I was like, I spent all of my 20s getting my PhD. I was like, no, I'm not going to go back to school. And it was, I learned so much from running a Vietnamese newspaper during the recession. And I learned about partnerships and how to be scrappy and how to do more with less, and how to partner with actually other ethnic media. And by that, I mean media organizations that serve immigrant, refugee, BIPOC communities. I mean, one of the other things we did was we partnered with a Hispanic distributor. So they could take us to Eastern Washington, because actually my brother and I ended up buying half the newspaper from our parents. My parents had two editions, a Tuesday edition and a Friday edition. And so for that first year of working at the newspaper, I was just exhausted all the time. And we had like, oh, if we could do things our way. And so we actually decided to, our parents had about $30,000 worth of debt. And we said, let's buy out their debt. And we put my brother's car as collateral. I Googled how to write a business plan. We were able to borrow money from a community development fund. And we then ran the newspaper. And one of the things we did was we quadrupled the distribution area. And we did that because we partnered with a Hispanic distributor, because that's where the Hispanic community in Washington is, mostly in Eastern Washington, which is where the farming is. And so doing things like that, like getting really creative. And they were super excited because we were their first non-Spanish newspaper to distribute.
And was it always in Vietnamese?
Yeah, the newspaper has always been in Vietnamese. It's primarily in Vietnamese. It'd only be when I would write something in English that would also be translated in Vietnamese, where we would run it in English, because this is a newspaper that serves primarily the Vietnamese readers. And there are other Pan-Asian newspapers. And also actually there's some youth-led Vietnamese media that's in English too.
Now, how many writers do you need to have for a newspaper of this size? And how often do you have to get out articles and ideas, or how does this work where you get the content packaged?
So there's I'd say that there's three different types of content. So there's general news content, and so we have a relationship with Nguoi newspaper, which has their own license and translations for all the AP stuff. So there's that. There's just general world news, national news. That's not original. And then there's community news. And so that's, hey, there's a grand opening of a windows covering company, or here's a supermarket, or here's the Thet festival, and here's the Catholic one, here's the Buddhist one, right? And so that would be, my dad did that a lot. And also people would just send in information too. And oftentimes it's just like, take a picture with a long caption, or like long stories. And then there would be the feature pieces, and that would usually be guest contributors. And so that was more rare. I would sometimes write that. We'd have people who just really want to get their work out, and so we would accept their contributions. And then we were fortunate a few years ago to get a Facebook grant that also allowed us to do some really great coverage. So, I mean, in terms of that kind of coverage, it was more volunteer, because we don't have the resources to do that kind of original coverage. And then also when I was organizing ethnic media, we'd also trade with even other local newspapers, and we'd just say, we're going to translate your content into Vietnamese. It's relevant to our community, and we'll translate it. And so that was another thing too. There'd sometimes be just press releases from community organizations. It was like, we're just going to translate this. We don't have the resources to write something original.
That's brilliant. Now, in terms of picking a a side, a political side. Is that something that internally these camps, like your family, would say, oh, okay, well, things are getting polarized. Let's pick a side to go. Like, let's naturally lean this way or that way. Does that happen or not?
Oh, yes. And I mean, this is an overseas Vietnamese newspaper, right? So it is going to have a natural anti-communist bent. And it's kind of, well, how anti-communist is it going to
Right.
be? Right. And so I would say my dad was always just about like we were staying moderate, and moderate is relative, right? I mean, moderate is it's still anti-communist. So I remember, here's an example. When it was 2000, I think it was 2009, and there was a big case in Olympia of defamation where there were some Vietnamese who accused some other Vietnamese members of being communist, of or like you are a communist, right? And I mean, they're all anti-communist and they're just kind of accusing each other of communism. And this had hit the national newspapers. And I remember telling my dad, we need to cover this because if these American newspapers are covering it, we need to cover it. And my dad was actually quite hesitant. He's like, oh, I don't want to get into it. And so I said, well, we need to cover it. And so I actually went, my dad made the introductions and we went down to Olympia. And I went with my brother and we actually interviewed both sides. And we're really proud of the fact that both sides were happy with the coverage. And so, and actually we have that in Vietnamese with English subtitles. So Kenneth, I'll send that to you so you can put in your show notes. Because it's actually like I think it's a really interesting way to think about Vietnamese American politics and dynamics of our community. Because it's really a sense of, it's a sense of loss, right? People have here, they still want to fight for something, to feel that they're still fighting against communism. And sometimes what that means is fighting within our own community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you guys have training, like journalist background training to go down and do that? Or is it just like family sort of just osmosis being around it?
I was the editor-in-chief of the high school newspaper. So, and I wrote a little bit for the college newspaper. No, I think I'm trained as a historian. So asking questions, it's part of what I do. And so, but there's not any, I didn't go to school for journalism.
So you go down there and you collect, all these angles with your brother, right? Mm-hmm. And you bring it back and you sit with your father and you sit at a table, discuss it. And who writes up the piece? So
I wrote up the piece and my father translated it. So, but we'd listen to it together. It's like, hey, these are the parts that are going to work. The piece, I think, is maybe like 5 minutes or something like that. So, whenever you do something, we were working with SBTN at the time. Mm-hmm. So we were the Seattle affiliate. And so it also went into, went national there. And so but it was a discussion of what is going to be, what we should put up. Something else that was controversial was one of the things in that particular case was the person who was being accused of being a communist. He had a red apron. It was a Christmas apron with a gold star. And so the people who were accusing him were like, that's a sign that he's a communist. And so I remember debating back and forth with my dad, should we put this on the newspaper? And I was like, I really think we need to put this on the newspaper so people can know for themselves what's this about. And so, and he was pretty worried about it. We put on the newspaper and it was actually okay. He was worried like, oh, people are going to accuse us of being secretly communist. Mm-hmm.
God, these things are so trivial now looking back, but people's lives depended on this stuff. We look back and we're like having a conversation.
Trivial is even relative, right? Because it's important to our community. It's part of our identity to be anti-communist of this overseas Vietnamese refugee community. And yet, what does that mean? What does that look like? Is this truly a sign of communism?
Yeah.
So,
and we're like smirking about it as you're telling the story. it's like it's such a funny, it's a small thing like the apron and the gold star, but these were people's lives and had to go to American court to figure this out. I mean, it's life changing for human beings to, these semiotic symbols that people have to kind of assign their identity to is like a big thing. I kind of hate it. I kind of hate it. I kind of
I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah.
I don't, it's not I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. I hate how it affects our lives in such negative ways, right? Because this guy, okay, let me ask you, this guy that was wearing this apron, he is saying that he's not communist, or what? Like what was the story?
Yeah, and he's actually he's the father of a very dear friend of mine, and he actually was an officer in the South Vietnamese military. He was teaching a Vietnamese school. He was like a real pillar of the community. He down in Olympia, and I mean, and he was accused of communism because by other Vietnamese.
And this is what kills me. It breaks my heart to know that this happened many years ago, and it really gets people to the point where you have to go to court to like figure this out, and you got to unscrew it.
It was, I mean, I remember I was asked to organize a meeting with the American ambassador to Vietnam. He was in town, and so I organized something with 30 Vietnamese American leaders, and my email, I sent out an email invitation, and even that was another newspaper published my email. So I guess that somehow they got the email, and it was read in this, oh, look at this organizing meeting with the American ambassador to Vietnam, and put through is this supporting communism lens.
Yeah.
So a lot of things can be read, and that was exhausting too, because it was like, oh my gosh, really? Like, is this what we're arguing about? And yet I just have to keep remembering this is important to people. This is important to not everyone. This is important to some people, and to dig in, like, why is that? Like, what's going on that this is the thing that they hold so dear. So.
When my family left in 75, I remember growing up, must have been 5. I mean, I was born in the States, they left in 75, but I must have been 5 or 7 before I even had any recollection of my mom and dad reconnecting with the family back in Vietnam. And I always think back to the fact that there was like no connection, and whatever connecting there was, it was very expensive. But when I've studied about this, like the lifting of the embargo and the history of, the pullout of the American troops, not more than, I think, 6 weeks into April 30th, so by May or mid-June, the Vietnamese government was reaching out to the United States, and they were trying to make deals. And there's this sort of like connective tissue that happens in history where these things are happening, but the people that it's affecting have no idea. Like, people like my parents probably thought that was it. The government, the new government of Vietnam has nothing to do with the US. But in actuality, there's like all of this like communication that's still happening, and one side's trying to persuade the other, and it's just a constant back and forth. It doesn't end. And we, on the society in general, as civilians, we think that there is meaning behind certain things, where in actuality we just go on living and then holding this like resentment and holding this hate for things that are not even there. I feel like sometimes they're just not rooted in like a real reality.
Well, I mean, kind of, this is the world we're living in right now, right?
Yeah.
We have all these conversations around misinformation and disinformation, and what is true and what is not true. And I mean, that's one of the things that actually really drew me to Vietnamese history, to studying Vietnamese history, because it is the perspectives are so different, and they are side by side right now. I mean, when I was in college, I got really drawn to studying, when I was studying about the Vietnam War. It's like, wait a minute, where's and I would tell my dad what I was learning, and he was just, the South Vietnamese aren't covered in that. Like, they're not included. I'm like, what do you mean? And so that was actually the my research in college. I ended up interviewing 40 South Vietnamese veterans about their perspective of the war. And I wanted to do it through a lens of not about winners and losers, because I feel like that's the how his American histories are often written. Because even if you think about Americans, oh yes, we lost and we shouldn't have been there, it's still so American centric.
You're right.
Right. And it's just like, there are 2 million Vietnamese living in the US, and people still tell me, I'm so sorry what we did to your country. And it's like, that we were fighting on the same side, right?
Yeah.
Like, you were actually our ally. So, and in any case, I just want to give you an example of that side by side history, the different perspectives. When I was living in Vietnam, the last time I lived there for a long time, that was 2008, and Ham Jen's Journey from the Fall had just come out a couple of years ago, and I got to see it when I was in Berkeley, and it was super exciting. And it was I love the film. My mom thought it was really accurate of the boat people journey, and so I showed it in Hanoi. I was living in Hanoi at the time, and I'd had these monthly movie salons, and I remember when the light turned on, my Hanoian friends, their faces were just shocked, because they were just like, that's not the history I know. Re-education camp was not like a prison camp or a labor camp. That's not what I was taught. And it was so, just to see their faces, right? And yet there are thousands of people who went through that, who could say, no, that's what it was like. And that just shows like there are multiple truths, right? And so like what we see in the US, like this super anti-communist view, I think also isn't totally accurate.
No.
And so it's not about, I don't think it's about getting to one truth. I think it's about accepting that there are multiple truths, and it's because it reflects how we see the world. And that's why I think Vietnamese history is super fascinating.
I've spoken to people in France, communists that were communists before the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Students that were Vietnamese students in France, and they were in their teens when they got to Paris to study. Parents sent them, they got scholarships, and they converted into this sort of like, this communist state of thinking. And they, along with other people in Hanoi that I've talked to just randomly, a lot of people have said, I got out of the party because I didn't like the way that the camps were conducted. Mm-hmm. And for me to hear that, doing these interviews, it's a shock to my system, because I was like, wait, it's either you're a communist and you're locking people up, or you're a prisoner of that system and you're trying to get out of it and you're scarred from it. But I didn't know that there's multiple gradients of in between people who were communists who don't agree and left the party and got back into the party, and they were upset that this was happening inside their own country at the time. And there's people who were really standing up against that whole thing, because they're like, wait a minute, we're trying to get like the deal to happen here, and locking people up this way is not humane. So there's people on the ground in Vietnam at the time that were I don't know, Vietnamese call it sang sut, right? Like they were aware enough to say, we got to stop this. This is not the right way to do things. So it's society, and it's like all of this stuff is happening in real time. But there's also people, I have uncles who did 13 years, and that's a reality. And I've heard it with my own ears, the difficulty of the life that they lived in there.
And I will say that when I was doing that, my undergrad thesis, I would see a difference of how the war was remembered based on how long someone spent in re-education camp. Yeah. Right, like the level of bitterness, if you were going to spend years, oh my God, is, and of course, that's how you'll remember things.
I talk about this all the time. I just literally talking to another guest about this. Brian Huang is an artist. I was I was saying that there's levels to all of this. Literally what I said was there's a 3-year guy, there's a 6-year guy, there's the 12-year guy, and then there's like the ultimate 17-year guy. And there's levels to all of it, because if you have friends that died in front of you, you're holding their body, that affects you a certain way. There's the guy who did 6 years and then like tried to escape and he got caught in the ocean like 4 times. He's pissed. And then there was like my dad, the guy who left a week before like all of it went down. And he'd been trying to get all the big guys in his family, all the uncles who are like lieutenant colonels and generals, and at a certain level, he was sending out the proverbial pigeons to all these guys, like, yo, like I got a boat ready to go. You got, none of them said, oh my God, great idea. They all said, if you get caught, we are not bailing you out. So then now a guy like that, like my dad raises a guy like me. So I'm like this rebel and I'm thinking, what's the big deal, guys? But now I understand. No. There's this
so
conversation
affects how we remember things. Yeah. And I think what's so fascinating is Americans don't know about re-education camps. Like, what? I was like, yes. So many people were sent to re-education camps after the war ended.
So let me ask you something. Being on the academic side of history, being inside of a news organization, and you're seeing sort of the way society is so polarized because of, and I bring this up all the time, because of algorithms. Are we ever going to get free from this? And I ask this because I keep thinking that these long form conversations, even if 10 people are listening or 1,000 people, if we are able to kind of break it down and, we're stretching out kind of like time and we're like piecing together like elements of like things that happen. Do you think we're going to ever heal, or we're going to be able to like love each other from a point of a place where things are much more nuanced and we can be like, okay, it's not black and white. We can therefore exist in places where we're just more understanding to each other. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think, based on what you've learned in your academic journey as a historian, that we're not going to be afforded that luxury?
I am actually pretty cynical.
Yeah.
And not because of my history background, but actually because of my work in technology and just the personalization of all these algorithms, and we're only getting delivered what we already clicked on and what our friends like. And so, so if you're consuming a lot of technology, then we're going to have that delivered to us. And I think the anecdote to that is actually relationship building, because I am much more likely to change my mind when I have a conversation with someone who I trust, who shares something that maybe I might not believe if I just read it, but because it's coming from a trusted source and someone who I care for and care about, like I'm much more likely to change my mind. I think actually what I'm seeing is we don't know how to have difficult conversations though.
Why?
And
why don't
we don't know how to have difficult conversations, because I think there is so much like, let's talk about these big topics. It's like, actually, can we start with the small stuff? Can we start with, no, I don't want to give money to your son's fundraiser, or no, I don't want to go to that party. We don't even know how to talk about like the small stuff. And so how are we going to talk about the big stuff? And so then the people who are able to talk about the big stuff are doing it really very kind of hostile way. And then other people are watching that and they're just, ooh, I don't want to get involved, so I'm going to be quiet. And so it ends up, there's the people who are really vocal get louder, and the people who are still thinking and processing get quieter. And so I think that's actually the divide, like those who are going to say something, those who aren't. And then that space is filled with people who are willing to be vocal on both sides, on all sides.
It's a really good point, Julie. It's a really, really good point. And I think culturally there's different spectrums as you go from culture to culture. And I think, like, for example, I think Americans, depending on what state and what city you live in, has a muscle that can do the debates, that can get to the hard, it's like cleaning an oven. There's like spots where it's like really difficult and you have to put like a lot of elbow grease and you got to really like scrub. And then there's, places in the United States where you can't remove that stain. It's just that it's impossible to have a conversation. Vietnamese people have, I think it doesn't, lend itself. The way we're structured, I think, with the chị, em, bác, chú, con, that kind of hierarchical way of speaking to each other provides some context for respect. But I mean, when it comes to like getting down to the debates or having a conversation inside of our family, it's a lot harder to have them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think any conversation is hard to have if you go in wanting to change someone else's mind and you're not willing to have your own mind changed. Right. So think about that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it right now.
Yeah. It feels hard if it's like, yeah, I want to change your mind. But if for me to go into a conversation where this is going to be, I think a lot about reciprocity. And it's just, I can be curious about other people. I have to let other people be curious about me. There has to be this back and forth. For them to learn, I have to be willing to learn. For them to change, I have to be willing to change.
That's hard as hell.
Yes. And so we can't, I mean, I think, I'm in a very deep blue part of the US, right? And there are all these assumptions about just, about the bad Republicans or the bad right side. And it's just, and I mean, I often feel conservative when I'm actually moderate, but it's just the spectrum that we're in. And so, and it's just wherever you are, like, what's that range? What's that spectrum? And is it like, I'd actually really love to spend some time in a purple state. Because I think that muscle you're talking about is probably much stronger because they constantly do have to debate that. And it's relative. I mean, my work around respect is about how respect is relative. Like one person can see it this way, another person can see the same behavior another way.
I was going to transition into the book, and you did a perfect job of transitioning into it. Can we talk about the title of the book?
Yeah, the title is called 7 Forms of Respect. And the subtitle is A Guide to Transforming Your Communication and Relationships at Work. And it's based on my personal lived experience. It's based on my community building experience, and it's also based on research. So my personal experience just growing up bicultural. And I learned Vietnamese actually after I started studying Vietnamese after I graduated from college. Wow. And then living in the UK and France, Germany, and in Vietnam, and just having these experiences like, wow, respect can look different. The way we treat each other can be different. And then there's community building, because once I got back to Seattle after I finished my PhD, I started doing a lot of community organizing and bringing together people from very diverse backgrounds. I mean, I told you the coalition of ethnic media, right? Just very diverse backgrounds, and how they wanted to be treated was different, and that create friction because we'd have different expectations. And then over the past few years, I started to go deep in this research, and I ended up doing focus groups and workshops and interviews and questionnaires and assessments with about 400 people. That's what this book is based on. And there I focused on the workplace. How do people want to be treated and want to treat others in the workplace? And the word respect came up a lot. So that's why it's these forms of respect. And I always tell people, I'm not going to teach you how to be respectful. You already know how to be respectful. It's just your idea of respect may be different from someone else's. So, yeah.
I love it. I think that we are, as a society, we're slipping away from time spent together, like having FaceTime, literal FaceTime, not digital, like Apple, but iPhone FaceTime, like real FaceTime. We don't spend it. We don't, and you see it when you spend time with families, the kids are on the iPad, and I'm a parent, so it's hard. I understand. Respect is not even in the it's not even in the formula, or it's not even in the dialogue anymore, because I feel like we're just so disconnected as human beings today, that there's not even a chance to even like practice this respect on the dojo floor. We can't even get together on the mat to go over it, because there's less connecting.
Well, and I think that people want to make snap judgments.
Yes.
Right. And so it's just, oh, they did this thing, they're being disrespectful. And then, but I'm not going to say anything. So I'm just going to harbor that resentment, kind of going back to my earlier point about it can be hard for us to talk about we can be hard to talk about the small, hard things. Let's not even talk about like the big, hard things. And so it's kind of actually, I mean, a lot of my work focuses on increasing self-awareness, building relationships, and communicating clearly. And so the first part is like, I have to be curious about myself. Like, why do I care about and do what I do?
Yeah.
How do I even think about respect in the ways that I do? I mean, just think about us growing up, and you got to call this person back, and you got to call this person go. And this is the way that you show respect. And this is actually, in the US, kids are taught to bow, right? Like and I remember having some Hanoian friends over, and they had kids, and their kids didn't bow. And it was like, hey, your kid's rude, right? And they're like, here's the thing, like, we don't do that in the North. Or at least like maybe now, I don't know if that was in the back.
Right.
And it's just like, we don't teach our kids to do this little bow. And yet here we are, even though me and my friends were like, didn't grow up in Vietnam, and yet we're feeling like your kids are disrespectful, right? And here they are. These are Vietnamese kids.
Yeah, and it's jarring, right, when they don't do it
for a visit. And so that gets at the heart of like just different expectations. And I don't think we're willing to slow down and ask, oh, what is my expectation?
Yeah.
And what is their expectation, and how that's oftentimes not going to align.
What is your relationship with your family look like? You mentioned your father passed away, right? But your brothers, your mom. I mean, do you still have to struggle with all this stuff, even though you know this stuff very well?
So you mean struggle with the
internal
tough conversations?
Dynamics? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have my two younger brothers. I mean, I'm grateful that we are close in that. I mean, actually right now I'm living with my two younger brothers. I never thought I would be living with my brothers as adults. But it's not like we talk all the time and have these deep, meaningful conversations. I would not have this conversation with my brothers, Kenneth. Right. And at the same time,
thank you.
And at the same time, we're not fighting about things. And so I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
I mean, when my father passed, we didn't fight about how to do things. And so I think it shows that relationships can be really different depending on, are they personal? Are they family? Is it work? Is it, and also the nature of the person. I mean, both of my brothers are just more soft-spoken, and so yeah, my mom has different interests, so our conversations are different. Like we just have, our conversations are much more limited. Like I wouldn't have this conversation with her. So
why not?
She's just not as interested in having these kinds of conversations. So and we also have different views, and I respect her views, and I don't always know if she respects mine though. So yeah. You know what I said about people wanting to change others. So
yeah, and I think that's a sort of a blind spot of people of that generation. I wonder if my kids will look at me that way too. I think about that often, how these young people. Yeah.
It's natural.
Yeah.
It's
But
natural. It's going to happen.
but I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person who my kids are like, what you just described about your mom. I don't want to be described like that by my kids or in any of the young kids that work for me, the 22-year-old. I want them to be like, that guy has more elasticity in the way he looks at things than I do. And that would be a badge of honor for me, right?
My friend just gave me some really good advice last night, and she said she realized like her mom's behavior doesn't change. It's how she feels about it changes. And so she started to pick up, oh, I feel better when we're in person versus when we're on the phone. And so that's something I'm going to be doing, like, because how much of this is about me and whatever my state of emotions are in my interactions. So
God, you'd make an excellent therapist. I want to go back a little bit to the newspaper and this idea of like retaining, because I have this one of my points in my questions. What when I think about, I got to go like way back, the American Indians, right? And I think about like the Pacific Northwest, and there's a rich tapestry of history of American Indians in that area. It's gone. I mean, maybe there's some oral history that's been recorded out there and it's been put out there. And there's all these romanticized versions of this, right? And when I think about a romanticized version of history in the Pacific Northwest with Vietnamese community, you're the last bastion of recording and doing this, you and your brothers. And it's gone after this, I think. I don't know, third generation, it's basically not going to continue. It's going to blend into some general American culture. It's not going to be, we're not going to be able to like extract like stories that, like, if we think of like American Indians in that area 300-400 years ago, like that's all gone. I guess my question is, like, as a historian and as somebody who has like this understanding of operations from a newspaper, where is our community and our culture gonna be in your pocket of the world 100 years from now?
I actually don't think it's gone. I think it just changes. So I think it changes, it evolves, how those stories get carried evolves. My friend Colleen Echohawk is the CEO of 8th Generation, and they have traditional Native American inspired goods, and so sometimes she gets like, is this made in the traditional way? And it's just like, well, I mean, it's made by Native Americans, and things change, things evolve. Are we doing it in the exact way that our ancestors did it? No, because we have technology now, yeah. Right? And I think that's also the case with these histories. Is I'm so excited by what young people are doing and how they are carrying on Vietnamese traditions. I think that they're in Seattle. There's Friends of Little Saigon. They do really great work. They're a nonprofit that does really great work to preserve our culture, and they're doing it in a different way. There's a park, there's an exhibit space, there's a cafe, and like, I love the way that they're doing it. So I wouldn't say that it's gone. I did say it's evolved.
All right. I'm listening going, well, the essence of the pain and the struggle and all of these stories that we're hearing and the exact way that we're hustling, all of that's like going to get watered down, right? And will we have a newspaper in the third generation, the next iteration?
Question, but Kenneth, that's a question that we've got to ask for all newspapers, not just of our own newspaper. I mean, the Seattle Times is hanging on because they're selling real estate, right? Like, there aren't that many print newspapers that are actually doing well. Like, and that's even, and you think about the resources that mainstream newspapers have. So, I mean, having organized and worked with a lot of different ethnic media, we're all kind of struggling. That's a big question mark for not just for Nguoi Viet Tây Bắc. And for Nguoi Viet and for Viet Bao and for all the other newspapers. It's a question of, as our culture and society changes, what are the mechanisms and what are the vehicles that are going to have to change to carry that culture out? And as you were describing that, because we were talking about us fading, right? Things fade.
Yeah.
And I think about pain, like in grieving, and in the initial days and months, there's an intense pain, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling that pain. And what happens later on is all I will remember is I had that pain. I'll never feel it again. I just can't. I can't. And so that's all we have, is we have the memories, and then what people do with those memories. And if we will continue to revisit them, and also seeing through whatever our lens is, because like right now, the lens is, there's so much polarization.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean of how we look at our own history?
Wow, this is such a complex topic, because the news business is predicated on this polarity, right? Once it goes away, does that mean that we're all going to be one big kumbaya tribe again? Or is there some different form of this?
I hope we don't. I hope it's not about we all see the same or we all agree. It's more that we all can agree to disagree, and that there are more shades of it, right? Because like right now, it feels like there are some narratives that are very dominant, right? And yet we know that there are all of these shades in between. I have a friend who started a media or a newsletter here that's called Evergray. And so you think like Seattle, it's like evergreen, right? And she calls it Evergray because there's so much nuance. And I love,
oh my God,
I love that. So
what a terrific title.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
terrific
It was
name.
my friend, Monica Guzman. And so, it's just, and so that's what I hope we have more of, just that nuance and the curiosity for that, and the belief that just because we don't agree, we don't have to win or lose. It's not about winning or losing. It's actually about learning.
We had a place. I mean, everybody has a place to kind of debate these things, write about them, think about them. You're reading and you're processing them as you're reading news, or you're consuming media and news. Once this sort of dies off, where are we going to have a place? I mean, is it going to be social media where we're just all over the place, or is there a focal point for humanity to kind of like debate things?
That's a really philosophical question, Kenneth. Yeah.
You started
it's just like, yeah, no, it's just like in the different platforms, right? So, I mean, who knows what will happen in Web3? I don't even know when like things are being debated right now on social media. Who knows where the new platforms will be and where that debate will take place. And yet I do believe that the ones where we are most likely to change our mind are going to be in person, and are going to be small group, and are going to feel where people feel safe. I mean, when I facilitate learning experiences, I actually really, I stress that it's so much more effective if we can do them in small groups of 5 or 6 to 8 people. And because that's where people feel safer. And even like groups of 2, like even like letting people just like, hey, let's start up with a conversation with one other person so I can practice saying this and saying what I believe, and how did that person react? And because I think that there's a lot of fear. And, go into where will these debates take place, or where will these conversations take place? I mean, I think that there's always going to be a place for in-person conversations, and then where does it get amplified? I guess like here, core conversation can take place in person, and then they get amplified in these other platforms.
When you were coming up in studying history, and did you think that you would become a teacher in the university system, or did you think that you were going to be a corporate trainer? I mean, what is the evolution of writing a book like Seven Forms of Respect? What was the ultimate goal? And I guess what I'm asking is, where did the journey for the inception of the idea come from? And then where did you think that it was going to take you in life, and why did you do it?
You know, when I was in college, I thought I was going to be an academic. And because it was like, okay, I'm studying history. And then I went straight from undergrad to grad. And it was just, this is the path. And academia, I think, looked different back then too, because I graduated in 01. And then as I was doing my PhD, I mean, towards the end of it, I just realized, like, this is not what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And then, so I had a very, I was able to be the first managing editor for the Journal of Vietnamese Studies. And so I was there for 3 years. And so I got to see the start of this journal and really get a front row seat in academia.
Wait, I don't even know about this journal. I'm so sorry. Can you?
Yeah. So it's
Is that something we can talk about?
Yeah. So the Journal of Vietnamese Studies started, gosh, I think it was 2006. It's an academic journal. It's published by UC Press. And it comes out, well, it came out back then quarterly. I don't know how often it comes out now, but it's an academic peer-reviewed journal that's primarily, it's in English, and it's for those who study Vietnam.
And how is it funded, and how is it distributed? Is there a business model?
No, it's an academic journal, so universities buy it. And it's a very niche market, right? Because it's an academic journal.
Okay.
And there's this whole world of academic journals that you will never see on a newsstand. And they are, essays in them are long. They are researched, and then you send it out for peer review, which means other academics look at it, and they're blind reviews, although it's hard to be blind in such a small field. You're just like, I know that this person is studying this, right?
I know you.
I know you. I know this research. I know this. Yeah. So, but in any case, so yes, I got to be its first managing editor, and it was founded, or the two lead professors, Peter Zinnemann from Berkeley and Miriam B.V. Lamb, who's at UC Riverside.
Miriam, you said? Miriam, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. Miriam B.V.
Miriam.
Yeah. So they were the two lead editors, two professors who led this. And so so yes, that's the journal. It's still going on today.
So crazy. I know Miriam in such a, in a social environment 15 years ago, like we met, and she's so laid back.
Yeah.
Just to hear her in this, just to hear her in this conversation, I'm like, I can't imagine Miriam like in this, managing or directing role. She's just so laid back and fun to be around, and she's such a fun person.
She's an academic though. so she's an academic and does really rich cultural studies. So that was getting that front row seat, and I realized I didn't want to stay in academia.
Yeah.
What I enjoyed was actually promoting the journal and learning how to do that business side and making recommendations of where was it going to go. And as I was finishing up my dissertation, I realized that I wanted to go into business, and that I wanted to get my real life MBA and to come back to Seattle and to run the newspaper. And I didn't know for how long. I also wanted to do that because as adults, we don't get to spend that much time with our parents. And I wanted to know that no matter what, I had that time. And being in a family business is very intense time. Everything revolves around the business. I mean, you know this. Mm-hmm. Every conversation comes back to the business. So
for better or for worse. And when the parents pass on, you think, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm very thankful to have had that time. It was a sticky time to be with my father.
Yes. And so then I was at the newspaper for 3 years, and I just knew I was working with 8 people. Half of them have the same last name as me. I need to move to a bigger org. And so that's when I got into technology. And so I started working at a couple of tech companies, and then I got recruited to do marketing at a nonprofit that represents the tech industry. And I ended up getting, I think it was my second real life PhD in organizational development, because there, I think it was just like that research brain. And so as I was organizing, I created a cross-sector collaboration fellowship, bringing together people from tech, government, and community-based organizations. And I would just watch how they collaborated. And I would just like tweak things and try things again. And that's when it was just like, oh, the heart of this is curiosity. It's curiosity and curiosity is contagious. If you have some people who are curious on a team, they can actually uplift the morale, because it becomes not about the outcome. It becomes about being together and learning together.
Wow.
That process, it's about the journey. And so that's why I was just, this is what I want to do. And so I told my dad middle of the pandemic, hey, I'm going to leave my nonprofit executive job and start this. And I was really worried about what he'd say. And he said, I'm so happy for you, because now you'll have freedom, and you will never, in America, you can always lose your job. Now you will never lose your job. Because I went through a couple of downsizings at the tech companies. So, and he told me, he hadn't told me that, he was like, I cried when that happened. So, and so then he was like, this is you're in control of your destiny. And I think about, though, this is a newspaper that served entrepreneurs. It's like serve other hustlers. Right? It's like, we're going to make this happen. And it does feel my destiny is in my own hands now. So
I hate to be of the thinking that we Vietnamese Americans go back to Vietnam and we save the country, because that's bullshit now. But
oh yeah, absolutely.
So to preface this next question is, well, do you ever think about like the work that you've done can actually help? God, I hate that word. Can actually change and inspire different ways of thinking in a country like Vietnam?
I hope that my work inspires not just in Vietnam, just it's about, we belong to multiple cultures simultaneously, and we are either following it or reacting in opposition to it. And so I hope that people who, I guess probably in the Vietnamese cases, they read it and they're like, oh, this is how respect, the different ways that respect can be seen in the US. If I go work in the US, if I interact with Americans, my idea of respect is not universal. And that's the message. And I think that, I hope that applies to anyone, anywhere. So for example, in Vietnam, thời gian là cao su, right? Like, and I just remember being so frustrated. It's like, I couldn't figure out why my Vietnamese friends would cancel on me last minute. I was like, they must know, that something is coming up. And why didn't they tell me beforehand? And so then I had a Hanoian friend who said, oh, they totally knew. It's just like, the reason why they told you last minute is because then it's an emergency. If they told you beforehand, it would look like a choice. And the choice is not to be with you. It's like, oh my gosh, right? And so maybe it will help those who are coming to the US, and it's like, oh, this is like, respect is relative, and how I see it might differ from how other people see it. And at the same time, though, I want those who are in the US to be like, oh, here are people who are coming, who are immigrants from other countries. And we're going to see the way that I want punctuality might not work for, they might not be giving to me, not because they're being disrespectful, but because culturally that's just not what they do. So I guess it's like, it's both ways. It's not a savior mentality. It's just, it goes back to like understanding one another. And it's also moving beyond the what of like, what do I care about? It's actually the why, and helping people go back and like, what are the stories around that? So for example, my mom growing up, my mom was constantly late picking me up from school. She's working all the time, but she's constantly late. And I felt a lot of shame because the school staff had to wait with me. And so she's like, when I grow up, I'm not going to do that. And that's my story. And like, you'll remember that much more than you'll remember punctuality. Right. And that's like, how do we connect over stories, and how do we spark conversations and get curious about one another, and understand that respect is relative, it's subjective, and it's also contradictory.
Yeah. I do want to go back to, why are we in Vietnam, in our culture, so disrespectful with time, with each other's time?
But it's not disrespectful, it's relative. They're not seeing it as, I mean, I think it's
okay. Let's break this
flexible.
down.
It's flexible.
Okay, but it's
because I don't think it's actually, I think it's like with the 7 forms of respect, it's more like, which are the ones that are important to you and which are the ones that aren't. It's not about being all 7. And so it's just like, hey, that form of respect is actually not important to me. It's not a priority for me. It's saying it that way. Hey, these are the ones I prioritize, and these are the ones that I'm ambivalent about, and these are the ones that actually I don't think are like, that don't matter to me.
Look, I'm going to make a generalization. When you're in Vietnam and you make appointments, it is very, very rare that you show up on time. Everybody's doing it. It's 15, 20 minutes late. Mm-hmm. But okay, let's remove the word respect out of this. How does society function when there's that kind of non-precision happening? When you can be an hour late.
It has been functioning though. Like, it has been functioning. They're doing really well. The economy's booming. So it has been functioning. And, you know, they could ask us the same, they could ask Americans the same thing of like, why does it matter so much?
Yeah.
Why?
But I think it's changing in the city. I think it's changing in the city though. Like in Saigon, I think people are doing things a little bit differently, but it's still not the precision that we're taught here in the West. And I'm going to just say it for the record. I think timing is very important. But just being on time is almost everything, because and it's not respect. It's just gears, right? Like when gears like have to function a way, it's got to like click. And if it's not clicking with this temporal metric, then what do we, how do you get the precision down and this?
But Kenneth, that's because like you grew up in a place where time is really valued. And like, if we were in Germany, it'd be even more so.
Yeah.
I mean, here it's just like, oh, the bus is late. Like there, it's unacceptable. Yeah. I mean, in a way where
Japan too.
Everything is on time, and like, you don't even match that. You don't delay the next one to, if one is delayed and the next one is not, the next one will leave, right? It's not going to wait for that transfer. And that could be impractical too. It's like, that's a little too precise. Like you've just missed a transfer because of 2 minutes. Like you weren't willing to wait 2 minutes or whatever. Right. And so yeah, I like, what I'm really interested in is, oh, it's different. Why is it different? What's that thinking behind it? Oh, you did mean to respect me, just not in the way that I wanted it. And that's actually the point of the work is to get at like, why?
Yeah, I think this is going to change the fabric of anybody who reads it and who understands it will shift their thinking in how we deal with each other.
Yeah, I hope it, because I think of using the analogy of languages. So think about at a company, and then within a company there are different departments, right? There are different teams. And so a company can have their national, they're at the high level, these are our preferred forms of respect. Like we are going to listen deeply to one another. So that's attention. We are going to give lots of praise. That's acknowledgement. But we're only going to give information on need to know basis. We're not going to share information with everyone. So they don't care. They deprioritize information. So let's say that's the national language. And yet on different teams, so the marketing team, the engineering team, the finance team, they're going to have their own preferred forms of respect, kind of depending on the leader and also depending on the function of the work. And I call that regional dialects.
Right.
Right. And then even within that, there's like me. There's like, I have my own individual preferences. So there's the individual, the team, and then the wider organization. Right. And those who do well are those who can speak multiple languages,
Multiple
right? Like
dialects.
who can move between and who can also understand, like who can also flex. And so with the 7 forms of respect, when I ask people what does respect mean, they talk about the golden rule. So treat people the way you want to be treated. Then there's the platinum rule, to treat people the way they want to be treated. And I actually have what I call now the rubber band rule. And that's like, it's actually, we are flexible. We do stretch because it's like, oh, this back wants that. I'll do that. It's not a big deal, but maybe I'm not going to do that for my AM because I don't need to. So,
Yeah.
right. And so we do stretch, but then sometimes we do things that, if we do things that we don't like to do too long, we're too uncomfortable with, we will snap and break. So it's actually important to understand what are our internal breaking points, right? So like in Vietnam, like I am fed up with people coming late or like canceling last minute. So either I'm just not going to invite you anymore because that's my breaking point. Like, no, this relationship, like I'm not going to call you anymore. That's my breaking point.
Yeah.
So, you got to know what your breaking points are.
All of this sounds a lot like EQ to me.
Yeah.
Just like the basis of EQ.
Yeah. Oh.
It is so important to understand this because this is the crux. This is the heartbeat of EQ, which is to understand, this empathetic way of looking at it from the language of respect, from the framework of respect.
And one of the things, even though when I was an academic, I loved big words. I loved big, complicated concepts and just like, oh, here's the structure of experience or whatever. I'd love that. And now I feel like I'm kind of going in reverse.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge advocate for speaking plainly.
Simplicity.
And so I think about my parents. Right now, there's so much conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and microaggressions and privilege and all of these concepts that are actually pretty abstract. And I think about my parents and would they know that word? And so I remember there's a social worker who'd speak to my dad in a really loud voice. His voice would go up, right? And he's doing it because he can hear my dad has an accent. He thinks that he's probably confusing it with like, oh, he's hard of hearing. And so I just said, hey, my dad's hearing is fine. Could you actually lower your voice?
Oh, shit.
No, but what I didn't say was, this is a microaggression. That's my point here. Like, I didn't say this was a microaggression. I just said what I needed. Right. And he was like, he agreed, he was just like, okay, thank you for letting me know. Right. I didn't use that word with my dad because then I would have had to explain it to my dad. And so I think, are we using words and thinking about accessibility? Like in terms of English accessibility, in terms of even education accessibility, like, and how often are we actually using big words as weapons?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. we're using big words as
Julie,
weapons. And that's why in this book, I actually tried very hard to just tell simple examples and use plain language. And because I self-published this book, I didn't have to play by the publisher rules and editors rules. So I'm like, Kenneth, I only had 2 footnotes and they were the same source. That is so liberating as someone who's a former academic who used to have to prove my self-worth with like hundreds of footnotes, right? And because it's like, at the end of the day, you call this emotional intelligence. Some of this is just like common sense. Like,
oh my God. Okay. So,
right. So,
yeah, but if you think about it now, the political climate in social media or wherever, they're all weaponized language. It's all weaponized. Privilege denotes hierarchy, right? There's somebody who has and somebody who hasn't. That already creates some distance.
And so when I'm running workshops, I tell people, one of the working agreements, do not use jargon. Do not use the word privilege. If you want to use the word privilege, I ask you instead to tell me what that means to you. Does that mean your parents paid for college? Does that mean you grew up in a 2-parent household? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What
does it mean you're talking too loud?
Yeah.
And it's
right.
simple.
Does that mean that you have good hearing? Right. Like, what is it? What are those things? And just be like, to speak precisely and plainly about it and to tell stories, because people remember those examples and those stories much more than they will remember privilege. In fact, what happens is people then go like, ooh, they used a word that I don't know, but I don't want to ask because I think that I should know that word. And so then people's defenses kind of slowly build up, but they're not going to say anything because they also don't want to look stupid, right? Like, I should know this. So that's, I think, the weaponization. I mean, there's what I call intellectual bullying that happens. And then there's just this subtle, like, setting up barriers.
Yeah.
To conversation, which I don't think needs to be there.
But that's what's happening with the corrosion in our communication society in the West. I think that is I'm going to walk away today feeling like that for me was the takeaway today is we have reduced these points of exactly what you were talking about with your father and this man who's speaking really loudly to microaggression, to in our efforts to shorthand, to create these shorthand communication words, we've I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but we've weaponized shorthand. And I think that's playing into algorithms that are computer based, and all of it together is destroying human connection.
Yes. And I think that curiosity is actually the antidote to that. It's actually slowing down to ask the question and to recognize that whatever someone feels about, so I'll use the example of the question, where are you from? And so I know that when for many Asian Americans, when they're asked this question, it's like it flares up like, you're telling me that I'm the perpetual foreigner, right? It's like, that's the signal. And for me, when I hear that, I'm just like, I tell people, like, this is where I'm from. Like, I was born in Vietnam. I grew up here. And then I turn, I'm like, so where are you from? Tell me about you. That's how I approach it. And I'm not dismissing people who get upset by hearing the question of where are you from. My point is, we will have different reactions. And what has happened is I have white friends who are like, oh no, you never ask an Asian person where are they from. That is off limits. That question is off limits. And it's actually like, no, some people actually invite that question and others are like, no, I don't like that question. And what we haven't learned is how to decline a question. Instead, what we do is like, I can't believe you asked that question, which then goes into there are certain things we can't say.
Declining a question is one thing. And then also how we ask the question, you know, there's ways that we can ask the question. I mean, what if we just ask directly? But I think it could be interpreted as segregation but even the word trigger itself comes from a part of a weapon, you know? And so to be triggered by the question, where are you from? This is a lot to unpack. I mean, this is not going to happen in one podcast episode, but I think we've started something that I hope that American society, specifically American society, will change as a result of what you're saying about this understanding of like respect has to be, we have to look at it a different way now. The shorthand is killing us. I mean, literally killing us.
Because we throw around this word and we don't understand that we mean different things by it. And it's just like, you're disrespecting me. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. And we don't say, well, what does that mean to you? We don't slow down to say like, hey, this is what I mean by respect. What do you mean by it? And we could, you know, we can say that about other words too. We're just like not breaking it down and having that conversation. Instead, it's like my belief versus your belief, when there's actually all those assumptions are based on all these other assumptions.
Julie, thank you so much. I walk away from these podcasts learning so much, and learning is one thing. Like, you can accumulate things that you learn, but like hearing things and it changes the way you see things. That's what happened to me in the last 15 minutes of this topic with you. Obviously, I'm curious about your life and, you know, your parents' work and your brother's work. But the last 15 minutes, you know, of our conversation here about, especially that I'm going to, you know, tell people about that story that you told me about your father and, you know, the idea of microaggression, but just, you know, being more practical and simple about how we talk to people and not complicate it with shorthand, because shorthand is meant to simplify, but it's actually, it complicates things.
Kenneth, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm a fan of your podcast. I'm honored to be on this.
And I'm honored to have you. Thank you. And I hope we can do it again with the second book, third book that you put out.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcast. Thanks again for listening.